Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to walk you through my perspective, what's next for housing. Here's a brief bio about myself. I'm a CPA. You can see that I've had a wide range of experiences. I have worked with many different organizations within the construction market, the real estate market, home building, etc., over the past decade or so. I'll talk about housing costs. I'll look at urban starts. I'll talk about permits, fastest growing communities. I'll talk about the overall challenges. In general, I'm going to give you my thoughts and feelings around and concerns around housing. So if you look at here, this is from September 25. At the time I did this, the October 2025 data hadn't been released. But as you can see, as I've looked at basically the average growth in housing cost price, which is about close to just over 4%. And if you use a target inflation rate of 1.9%, housing costs are running about two and that times three times the cost of inflation. The other thing too is what we're seeing is housing growth itself hasn't kept pace with overall population, and that's something else you can see here where I've looked at housing starts per capita in terms of where we're at. It's significant because in order to properly manage housing, we have to tie it to multiple conditions, including population growth. Here's a look at the fastest growing cities. Now, I just took a snapshot, and this range list can change and fluctuate, but I can speak from experience of the consistencies in videos I've seen around Winkler, Woodstock, which is my hometown, Collingwood, Summerside, Moncton, London, Belleville, and Guelph, and Barrie areas, because people have been pushing out of the urban areas to more rural areas, and that's putting a lot of pressure on local planners around meeting housing supply and cost affordability. This gives you an idea of housing starts. Now, what I've done is I've compared September 2025 with September 2024, and then I've compared month over month comparison here. And as you can see, for example, Guelph seeing the largest increases, same with London. Now, this can factor in if you've got multi-unit construction starting have been approved. That's going to factor in and make that number a little bit higher, and that's probably what's happening in London. But if you look at some of the areas down below where you're seeing Hamilton, St. Catharines, Victoria, and stuff, they've lagged the previous month or in a bit of a decline. This gives you where I basically looked again at the urban areas, and it just gives you a kind of indication of just the month over month trends. I just ran the construction permits. They just came out for September. And what I done is I look at the rankings in terms of the percentage change month over month in terms of increases and where they've decreased. And this kind of gives you an idea of where the decreases happen month over month. And you look at Thunder Bay's on this list and you take it all the way down to Barrie, St. Catharines, and where we're seeing a decrease. This gives you an idea of where the permits have increased. Windsor makes sense because there's been a lot of activity in Windsor around manufacturing plants, around the EV facilities and other things where we've seen an increase. You look at Regina, Saskatchewan, you look at Winnipeg, these areas have seen a lot higher, better economic growth. But when you get down to the other end where we're starting to see a little bit of a decline, you'll start to see those areas have had some struggles economically and other challenges. This gives you an idea the overall what's happening is now I've estimated October basically on a run rate just to give an idea. But what we're really seeing is we're still seeing challenges to up the housing start, and a lot of that is to do with the interest rates and just the debt levels of everything else going on, and that's impacting the overall housing market as well. This gives you a little bit idea on urban areas of what's actually happening in terms of the resale market. And I pulled this from the Scotiabank. It gives you some indication. Now, like anything else, I've been capturing this data for well over a decade or so. A lot of my information has been loaded up in SlideShare. But if I factor in the left-hand side, and I took this slide from 2021, why? Just because I wanted to have a metric around post-COVID, where we're starting to come out of it in 2021, where the housing costs were up 40%. Housing still wasn't keeping pace with population growth, and the approval to get building permits in general, especially for residential, was quite long. Adoption of green building was happening more and more, maybe at a slower pace because technology was evolving. And there was still an infrastructure gap with local governments. And people were moving outside the core urban areas like the GTA, Vancouver, Montreal, to the suburban areas. Now, if I fast forward from 2019, the government's in the process of approving a budget. Within that budget for 2025 and beyond is creating a new department for a housing agency to streamline basically modular housing. Now, there's the verdict's out how effective that policy will be or not. I'm not going to get into debate at this point, but I'm just going to make you aware of it. Cities have been adopting more process changes around urban planning in terms of permit transformation. City of Kelowna has led the way. Surrey's up there now, and the city of Burlington, if it hasn't started, is in the process of starting to implement or develop a model to help streamline the permits. Housing costs have slowed, but they still are an issue in terms of construction material costs, softwood lumber, cement, and all that. Some of that's been impacted by the tariffs and other factors. The economy has slowed to a crawl, and in 2019, as we were coming out of the pandemic, we started seeing growth pick up again. But GDP growth is critical because that's going to drive other aspects around consumer spending and job growth. What is required for housing? I've talked about a lot about these issues for a few years now. And one of the biggest argument is point one. Now, I will say that before and qualify the points on here. Just because I have listed them 110, I wouldn't say they're the priorities, but these are just the top 10 items I've seen the concerns with and need to be addressed. If I look at housing itself in general, it's not one size fits all for the housing market. You have local needs that are much different based on the local government's requirements. The adoption of construction technology has been a challenge. 3D printing has faced a lot of different challenges, weather technology evolution as well. Modular housing seems to be a bit more stable, and I'm seeing more activity in that area. And mass timber is growing in demand, but we lack the capacity in terms of building mills. There's been government commitments recently out in BC around building new capacity supporting that, but that takes time to build up that capacity, along with the building and construction codes have to adopt to that. Moving forward with digital data AI strategy is on the market, and on the market, it's the target of most municipalities across Canada, as well as both provincial, territorial, and federal governments. There has been a pivot on immigration policies, more to tie it and slow the growth because of the concerns around housing. All levels of government need to come up with an effective strategy to deal with infrastructure gaps, including funding. We need to protect arable land in terms of food security and overall food production. Addressing the cost of housing, it isn't going to be one policy. We've got the impact of tariffs, we've got the industrial carbon tax, we've got property taxes, we've got other fees to come in. It's going to take an overall review of all those policies in terms of how we're going to basically support it to bring costs down to make them more reasonable. Cities are adopting smart cities, but it seems to be more prevalent in the US. I haven't seen a lot of big adoption, and that ties a smart city into the overall AI data and digital adoption strategy. And we need to mitigate threats around climate change, whether that's around water management, whether that's around forestry, vegetation management, whether it's around the grid, all that we need to change or pivot around that. And we need to learn lessons of what happened in the Los Angeles fires, Lahaina, and other flood prone areas that have been impacted by the overall flow of changes in climate and just the overall how we have to mitigate against it. We need to address policies that are going to drive economic growth beyond just urban areas into more rural, remote, and northern communities to support economic growth. to to basically share the wealth a bit. And the key aspect with Canada is how do we do that in a sustainable way with our natural resources? How do we get into more advanced manufacturing? I could go a whole session on this, but the goal and the scope of this is more about basically addressing the need to have an effective economic development strategy to make Canada one of the top countries in the world for GDP per capita. Here's some links to other blogs or other items I have written over the past few months and years. You can follow my work through LinkedIn. I tend to write a lot of blogs about getting information out. Here's my email. If I can be assistant going through any sort of business strategy, talking to you about data and AI adoption or business automation, you can reach out to me. Thank you.